Good morning. This novel, Heartache of Marjory X, introduces a woman narrator born into a wealthy banking dynasty who grapples with a cold, aristocratic upbringing and a loveless marriage of convenience. Writing from the perspective of 1992, Marjorie recounts her life in 1970s London, detailing her discovery of her husband's hidden life and probable infidelity, which leads to her profound emotional isolation. The story follows her attempt to find solace through her three children and her family's country estate, as well as developing a bond with her Irish maid, Lanaya. After a pivotal journey to apartheid-era South Africa serves as a catalyst for Marjorie's moral awakening, it prompts her to confront her own privilege and naivety. Ultimately, she takes a defiant stand by legally sponsoring a young black girl to escape oppression, signaling her transformation from a submissive socialite into a woman of independent agency. But there's more than meets the eye to this, and you will have to read the book to understand why, and understand why I didn't write it. A lady called Stickwoman wrote it. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the AI voices. And if you would like to subscribe and ring that bell to support this channel, that would be fantastic. Thank you for listening.
So I want you to picture this scenario for a moment. Just really imagine it. It is the mid-1980s.
Right.
You are deep in the basement of this illicit, heavily guarded London nightclub.
Oh, wow.
The air is just thick, the music is industrial, and there's a woman who is currently beating a man with a wooden bat.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and other men are quite literally begging to kiss her boots. Now, you might assume this woman is like a seasoned underground dominatrix.
Sure. Yeah, you would think so.
But she isn't. She is actually the heir to a £100 million banking dynasty.
It's just wild.
Right. She is standing there wearing a meticulously tailored Prada suit.
Unbelievable.
And until very recently, she lived a life so sheltered, so thoroughly insulated by extreme wealth, that she didn't even understand what basic slang terms meant.
Yeah, she was completely oblivious.
So the question is, how does someone travel from a silent, aristocratic ivory tower to the absolute bleeding edge of London's underground subculture?
Well, I mean, it requires a collision of immense privilege, profound trauma, and just this almost desperate hunger for reality.
Yeah, exactly.
And the most compelling part, really, is that we wouldn't know any of this if the protagonist hadn't found a highly specific psychological loophole to confess her secrets.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We have our hands on this extraordinary, totally labyrinthine document.
It's quite a read.
It really is. It's a text titled The Heartache of Marjory X. And we are going to guide you through a story that involves extreme post-war banking wealth, international smuggling.
Which is still crazy to me.
I know, right? Plus, deeply complex family trauma and the darkest corners of nightlife.
Yeah.
But we have to establish the framework first, because the author, who calls herself Marjorie X, uses a very particular literary device here.
Right.
This text is what's called a roman à clef. And it is essential to understand what that term implies. So roman à clef translates from French as a novel with a key.
It is a purportedly true lived experience that has been deliberately overlaid with this facade of fiction.
Like a disguise.
Exactly like a disguise. Marjorie tells us in the very first chapter that every single name, every venue, every geographical location has been changed.
Right. And she claims this is, to protect the innocent.
Yes.
But reading through this text, it feels like much more than just a legal shield.
Oh, absolutely.
But utilizing this roman à clef format, Marjorie grants herself this ultimate psychological permission. Like, if the names are fake, The emotions can be brutally, uncomfortably honest.
Yeah, she strips away the polite, manicured filters of her high society life.
She really does. She exposes her own prejudices, her blinding naivety, and her most destructive decisions. The key basically unlocks the truth that polite society demands remain hidden.
Well, the Romana Clef operates as a pressure valve. You know, when you belong to a demographic that strictly polices reputation.
Right.
Where maintaining the family facade is treated as a blood oath, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Writing a straight memoir would be social suicide. So the fictional veneer allows the author to confess without technically detonating their own life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really comprehend the explosive choices Marjorie makes later in her 30s and 40s, we have to understand the baseline.
Yes, we do.
We have to dissect the bubble she was born into, though, I mean, calling it a bubble is far too gentle.
It functioned much more like a gilded cage.
Yeah.
A cage welded shut by a combination of immense financial machinery and staggering personal loss.
So let's look at the timeline. Marjorie is born in 1952 into this massive banking empire. We are talking generational tectonic plate-level wealth here.
Unimaginable wealth, really.
But then in 1960, when she's just 8 years old, her entire immediate world is obliterated.
It's just so tragic.
It is. Her parents and her grandmother are flying in a Beechcraft Bonanza.
Right.
They hit a severe snowstorm over the Scottish Highlands and crash into B&I. Everyone is killed.
Yeah.
So in the span of a single afternoon, this 8-year-old girl inherits a financial dynasty.
And the psychological ramifications of that, I mean, they just cannot be overstated.
Yeah, of course not.
Sudden, violent loss at that developmental stage often freezes emotional maturation.
Makes sense.
But when that grief is combined with sudden, massive inheritance, the child basically becomes an asset to be protected.
Like property, almost.
Exactly. So she is taken in by her grandfather, Jeremiah, who is this old-school, very stern patriarch.
Right.
He purchases a sprawling Regency house in London's Great Cumberland Place. And that estate becomes Marjorie's entire physical and psychological universe.
And she paints this really haunting picture of this environment. Like outside, it's the 1960s, right?
Yeah.
London is swinging, the Beatles are exploding, society is radically shifting.
Our whole culture is changing.
Right, but inside Jeremiah's house, it is completely noiseless. It's a grade 2 listed fortress overflowing with, like, the poetry of Italian paintings and the silence of a mausoleum.
Yeah, mausoleum is the perfect word for it.
And Marjorie's self-assessment regarding her upbringing is brutal. She repeatedly refers to herself in the text as stupid and naive.
She really does.
She claims she had the emotional maturity of a 10-year-old even when she was a grown, married woman.
What's fascinating here is how we interpret that self-proclaimed naivety. Like, is she truly innocent? Or are we looking at the deliberate, systemic shielding that only the ultra-wealthy can engineer?
That's a great point.
Consider her environment. Jeremiah controls vast financial empires, yet he's described as a man who hates to bathe and smells faintly of sour whiskey.
This is a vivid detail.
Right. And Marjorie is surrounded by a small army of servants, yet she has zero concept of how the actual world operates. Her innocence isn't an accidental byproduct. It is a highly curated product of her environment.
Curated innocence. I really want to linger on that concept because she uses an analogy in the text that struck me.
Oh, about the box.
Yes. She says her upbringing was like being raised in a tiny box with no windows. Her wings were clipped before she even knew she had them.
Yeah, it's so incredibly sad.
It is, but I have to push back a little on the idea that this was purely a product of wealth. Like, was this extreme isolation actually a massive psychological defense mechanism?
Interesting.
Because if the outside world is the place where your parents die violently in a snowy plane crash, making the inside world a windowless box might be the only way a traumatized child and a grieving grandfather can feel safe.
It's almost certainly a synthesis of both.
Right.
Trauma builds the walls, and extreme wealth provides the mortar to ensure those walls are impenetrable. The grandfather, dealing with his own monumental grief, likely weaponized his resources to guarantee his only remaining heir would never be exposed to risk.
But here is where that isolation becomes truly toxic. It breeds a profound lack of empathy.
Absolutely.
Which we see brilliantly illustrated through the servant dynamic, specifically her relationship with her maid, Linnea.
Right. Linnea serves as this vital counterweight to Marjorie in this narrative. She is an Irish maid who functions as Marjorie's closest confidant, but her background is a complete masterclass in survival.
Yeah, Linnea ran away from a horrific, physically abusive father in Ireland when she was 12 years old.
Just 12. It's hard to fathom.
12!
Right.
She navigated crossing the sea and survived entirely on her wits and labor. And then we get this chilling scene in the text.
Oh, the doorstep scene.
Yes. Marjorie is returning from a shopping trip at Selfridges, right? Pushing a pram, and she finds this rough, angry man blocking her front gate.
Yeah.
It is Linnea's abusive father who has somehow tracked his daughter down.
And pay close attention to Marjorie's internal monologue in this moment. There is no fear.
None at all.
There is no empathetic concern for Linnea's safety. Marjorie is primarily irritated that a working-class man is speaking to her without removing his hat.
Exactly. She just deploys this cold, aristocratic iron in her voice. She dismisses him from the doorstep, threatens to summon a policeman, and swats away this man who has been the singular terror of Linnea's life as if he were just a mildly annoying wasp.
Yeah, it's so dismissive.
On one hand, it demonstrates the staggering power of her class, but on the other, it reveals a terrifying emotional void. She cannot comprehend the darkness of the real world because she has never had to live in it.
And that void perfectly sets the stage for her transition into adulthood.
Yeah.
Because curated ignorance leaves a person entirely defenseless when the time comes to navigate complex adult relationships.
Oh, absolutely.
It explains exactly how she ends up in a disastrous marriage.
So let's talk about the mechanics of that marriage, because it moves us from childhood isolation into a legally binding nightmare.
It really does.
In 1968, at the age of 16, Marjorie is married to a man named Douglas. And she admits point blank in the roman Clef that this was not a romance. It was a corporate merger.
Yeah, we have to view this through the lens of 1960s dynastic preservation.
Right.
Aristocratic estates were essentially massive, illiquid corporations. Marjorie represents a sprawling banking empire. Douglas represents the formidable insurance empire.
So it's just business.
Exactly. Marrying a 16-year-old girl to an older man wasn't about love. It was about the amalgamation of assets, tax mitigation, and securing a bloodline that would inherit the consolidated wealth. She was just a necessary signature on a very large contract.
And what does that contract buy her? A ghost.
Yeah.
Douglas is entirely emotionally absent. The text details his routine. He leaves their London house at 6:30 in the morning and spends his evenings entrenched at the all-male Savile Club in Brook Street.
Leaving Marjorie completely marooned.
Marooned is the perfect word. She spends her time either wandering that massive London house or retreating to Barbary Manor, which is a traditional 19th century farm they own in Kent.
And Barbary Manor acts as this externalization of Marjorie's internal state.
How so?
Well, it is described as an anachronism. A working farm that still uses horses instead of tractors, stubbornly insulated from the modernization sweeping the country.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It mirrors Marjorie perfectly stuck in time, shielded from reality, functioning on outdated protocols. Meanwhile, Douglas is operating in an entirely different orbit.
An orbit defined by incredible pretension. Marjorie detests him. She writes about his habit of constantly quoting dead languages.
Oh, the Latin.
Yes. He quotes Latin to the couturier. He quotes Latin in fine restaurants. He even quotes Latin to the petrol attendants filling up his car.
It's so cringe-inducing.
She finds it pathetic and unsexy. But her disdain for him is just this dull, manageable ache until she is forced into a brutal, undeniable awakening.
And the Romana Clef format allows her to surgically dissect how this awakening unfolds.
Yeah.
It serves as a brilliant study in upper-class denial. In these circles, as long as the facade remains intact, the truth is considered irrelevant.
But the facade begins to crack during a lunch at Rule's in Covent Garden.
Right.
Marjorie is meeting her glamorous old-school friend, Charlotte, who is visiting from South Africa. And Marjorie finally breaks down over her Dover soul.
She just loses it.
She does. She confesses the utter misery of her marriage, detailing how she and Douglas have entirely separate suites and how he never initiates physical contact. Charlotte, who operates in a much more worldly sphere, starts dropping heavy hints. She bluntly asks if Douglas is queer or bi.
Which is very direct for the time.
Extremely direct. And she mentions the specific places certain men go to when they visit Cape Town.
And Marjorie's reaction is visceral. She is genuinely horrified and physically repulsed by the suggestion. She states, "I cannot even begin to imagine that my husband..."
Right.
She simply does not possess the psychological vocabulary to process a reality outside the rigid aristocratic norms she was raised with.
No, not at all.
But the narrative brilliance here is how the ultimate shattering truth is delivered. It isn't a dramatic, tear-filled confrontation with her husband, it arrives tragically and almost comically from the mouth of her toddler.
It is a phenomenal scene. Marjorie is tucking her young daughter Ava into bed, and out of nowhere, this innocent child looks up and asks, "Mummy, why is a 2-pound note queer?"
It's just the sheer innocence of the question is what makes the impact so devastating. The phrase, queer as a 2-pound note, or queer as a $3 bill, was common slang at the time for homosexuality. But Marjorie, in her windowless box, doesn't even know the slang.
She is completely baffled. She asks Ava where she heard such a phrase. And Ava matter-of-factly explains that she was playing in the kitchen and overheard Mrs. Edwards, the cook, telling the cleaning girl that the master is as queer as a 2-pound note.
And this shatters the illusion on multiple levels simultaneously. First, there is the revelation of her husband's secret life, that he is spending his nights at underground clubs and keeping adult material locked in his mahogany-paneled study.
Right.
But perhaps more humiliating is the realization of her own profound ignorance. The entire household staff, the people serving her soup and making her bed, have known about it for years.
Yeah, they're gossiping about the reality of her marriage in the basement while she sits upstairs in the drawing room completely clueless.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? Consider the blistering irony here for you, the listener. Here is a woman who commands hundreds of millions of pounds. She can walk into any luxury boutique and buy the entire inventory. She takes tea at the Ritz. Yet she lacks the basic street smarts and observational skills of an average teenager. Her staggering wealth couldn't purchase the truth about her own husband.
But it also requires us to look at the systemic pressures on Douglas.
Okay, yeah.
The text doesn't paint him as a cartoon villain in a vacuum. He is trapped by the exact same dynastic machinery that trapped Marjorie.
That's fair.
In the 1960s, a man in his position was required to marry a woman from a suitable family, produce a legitimate heir to continue the lineage, and merge the corporate estates. Aristocratic society offered zero alternative paths.
None whatsoever.
So he compartmentalized. He performed the mandatory duty of the aristocratic patriarch by day and sought his actual human desires in the shadows at night.
And because of that shared entrapment, their marriage remains this frozen, resentful detente for years. They exist in parallel universes within the same houses. Until Douglas dies in 1981 in a manner that feels almost absurdly anticlimactic.
It really does.
He is attending a business meeting in France, gets bitten by an insect, contracts rapid septicemia, and simply dies.
Just like that.
Just like that. And his family, who Marjorie has barely interacted with over the years, swoops in and entirely cuts her out of the funeral arrangements. They repatriate the body to London and slam the door in her face.
Which underscores the brutal transactional reality of her existence. She was a vessel.
Yeah.
A vessel to merge the banking and insurance estates, and a vessel to produce the heirs. Once Douglas is dead and the children are born, his family views her as a completed contract. She is entirely expendable to them.
It is a harsh reality, but we need to rewind the timeline slightly because prior to Douglas's death, Marjorie orchestrates a trip that fundamentally alters her worldview.
Yes, the South Africa trip.
Exactly. Desperate to escape the suffocating gray reality of her failing marriage, she takes her children and Linnea on a month-long excursion to visit her friend Charlotte in South Africa.
Right.
And this narrative shift is crucial. We move from claustrophobic domestic drama to sweeping international ethics.
It represents a massive paradigm shift. Marjorie leaves the oppressive, rain-soaked atmosphere of 1970s London and touches down in Fresnay, Cape Town.
Quite a contrast.
Huge. And initially, her reaction is one of complete intoxication. She is viewing South Africa purely through the lens of extreme elite privilege.
Oh, she is swept away by the aesthetics. She compares it to a Hollywood movie set. The climate is balmy, the beaches feature pristine white sand, palm trees line the avenues.
Sounds idyllic.
Right. She is staying in Charlotte's ultra-modern Art Nouveau glass house overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, and she is mesmerized by the sheer consumer novelty of Charlotte's lifestyle. I mean, Charlotte has a microwave.
I love this detail.
Marjorie devotes paragraphs to her absolute astonishment that a box can cook a lobster in a matter of minutes. It represents peak futuristic luxury to her.
But the illusion of this coastal paradise is structurally flawed. And it is Linnea who exposes the rot beneath the floorboards.
Of course it is.
Right. While Marjorie and Charlotte are out drinking expensive wine and tending the theater, Linnea is spending her time in the kitchen with Charlotte's maid, Aletta.
Yeah.
And Linnea, drawing on her own history of survival and abuse, quickly uncovers the dark reality of this beautiful lifestyle.
Linnea explains to Marjorie that Aletta is an orphan, perhaps 15 to 16 years old, and she lives in District 6.
Now, we must contextualize what District 6 means. Under the apartheid regime's Group Areas Act, this was a designated colored area, subjected to forced removals and systemic impoverishment.
Yeah.
Aletta is forced by law and circumstance to hand over all her wages to an abusive guardian. She is working nearly 70 hours a week in Charlotte's pristine glass house. She is effectively enslaved by the brutal, race-based economic machinery of apartheid.
And Charlotte, Marjorie's best friend from her posh English boarding school, is completely oblivious to the humanity of her staff.
Willfully oblivious.
Honestly, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, Charlotte casually warns Marjorie not to distribute any money to the children begging on the street, using incredibly derogatory language.
Disgusting.
Marjorie is deeply unsettled. She actually starts utilizing the South African Library to do her own research. She studies aerial maps. She sees the stark, engineered divide between the lush, wealthy white neighborhoods and the sprawling, desperate shanty towns.
She's waking up.
She realizes that Charlotte's husband's diamond wealth is built on a foundation of systemic cruelty that is merely one step removed from actual slavery.
This is the precise moment Marjorie's curated innocence fractures permanently. She cannot unsee the systemic machinery of apartheid. But more importantly, she recognizes her own proximity to it, and she makes an active decision that she refuses to be complicit.
Linnea, acting on pure survival instinct, secretly gives Aletta 20 pounds, which is a substantial sum at the time,
Very substantial.
and instructs her to go to the post office and apply for a passport. When Marjorie discovers this, she initially scoffs. She views it as a tragically naive plan. Like, how is an impoverished teenager from District 6 going to successfully navigate international immigration laws, board an airplane, and get through British customs with zero money and no forwarding address?
Marjorie's pragmatic assessment is entirely correct. A passport alone wouldn't save Aletta from the apartheid state.
Right.
But rather than shutting the plan down, Marjorie does something extraordinary. She hijacks it. She decides to leverage the very thing that has kept her trapped her entire life, her immense untouchable wealth and her diplomatic influence.
Wait, let me stop you there, because the text glosses over this, but are you telling me she just walked into a London court and legally claimed ownership of a South African teenager?
Yes.
How is that even legally permissible across international borders during apartheid?
It requires an incredible manipulation of legal loopholes. Marjorie utilizes the archaic UK system of wardship. By applying to the High Court, she essentially petitions the British legal system to make the Crown the legal guardian of the child, with Marjorie acting as the agent with care and control.
That is wild.
She flies back to London, marches into the South African High Commission, and calls in massive favors with a discreet, highly connected diplomat named Simon Willimot. She wields her family's banking influence as a blunt instrument to forcefully bypass South African immigration restrictions.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is Marjorie's single greatest moment of agency.
Absolutely.
The irony here is that the very wealth that isolated her in a windowless box is what gives her the power to break someone else out of an actual prison.
Precisely. The extraction logistics read like an espionage thriller.
Right. Aletta later recounts the story to Marjorie in the back of a London taxi.
Oh, yeah.
Aletta was simply walking to her grueling job in Cape Town when a large, imposing black car pulled up alongside her. Two white men grabbed her. She was terrified, assuming she was being arrested by the apartheid police to be sent to prison.
Of course you would think that.
But instead, she is held in a room, informed that a great white lady has orchestrated her relocation to England and is placed on an international flight.
It is a forceful, arguably aggressive act of liberation. Marjorie doesn't ask for permission. She uses her privilege to physically rip Aletta out of the apartheid system. When Aletta arrives at Heathrow, she's wearing an awful polka dot dress provided by social services, completely terrified, but fundamentally free.
And Marjorie follows through. A few years later, Aletta is fully embracing 1980s London culture.
Yeah, she is.
She's listening to Grandmaster Flash, wearing electric blue eyeshadow, and she gets pregnant out of wedlock. The father is a working-class man named Freeston, who is training to be a librarian at the London School of Economics.
And in Marjorie's rigid aristocratic circles, an unwed pregnancy involving a working-class student would normally precipitate a massive scandal.
Oh, massive.
It would require the immediate dismissal of the staff member.
But Marjorie's reaction defies her programming. She is initially shocked, but she meets Freeston, evaluates him as a charming, intelligent young man, and decides to fully fund their existence. She buys them a house in Lambeth. She guarantees the freedom, education, and prosperity of Aletta's entire future family line. It is a stunning, hopeful contrast to the misery of her own domestic reality.
Which serves as the perfect pivot point. Because while Marjorie has successfully engineered Aletta's liberation, her own life is about to veer into deeply uncharted territory.
It really is.
By 1986, Douglas has been dead for 5 years. Aletta is safely married and settled. Marjorie is now in her early 30s. She possesses unimaginable wealth. She is completely unmoored from the patriarchal control of her grandfather and husband, and she is practically starved for an authentic, visceral experience.
For 30 years, Marjorie's entire existence has been defined by rigid aristocratic rules. So when she is finally untethered, she doesn't just dip her toe into freedom. She seeks out the absolute antithesis of her windowless box.
Yes, she does.
And she finds it in the most chaotic place imaginable, a Comic-Con convention in London.
It is a masterclass in contrasting environments.
So Marjorie's eldest daughter, Ava, is deeply invested in sci-fi, fantasy, and Dungeons & Dragons.
Right.
She begs to attend this convention. Marjorie, attempting to be a supportive mother, accompanies her. Imagine this visual. Marjorie is sitting in a drab convention center cafe. She is wearing a fiercely expensive tailored Prada suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, and she is entirely surrounded by thousands of people dressed as wizards, cyborgs, and intergalactic warriors.
If we look for an illuminating metaphor here, imagine a highly calibrated, intricate Swiss watch suddenly being tossed into a kaleidoscope.
Oh, that's good.
The rigid ticking gears of her high society programming are suddenly colliding with pure, unadulterated, colorful chaos.
Yes, and then the catalyst arrives. A man approaches her table holding a cup of coffee, but he isn't in a suit.
No, he's not.
He is dressed as a green female alien. He's wearing a bright green wig, green face paint, prosthetic breasts, bright red lipstick, and a long swishing tail.
The tail is crucial here.
It is. He politely asks to sit down, but the tail gets tangled in the chair legs. He trips and he completely eats it on the floor, spilling hot coffee absolutely everywhere.
The sheer physical comedy of the moment disarms Marjorie completely.
Instead of reacting with haughty disdain or calling for a manager, she bursts out laughing. She finds it delightful. It shatters the stiff, formal protocol she has been chaining for her whole life. They end up chatting for an hour.
Yeah.
Later, as Marjorie is leaving the convention, a man in a smart, conventional business suit walks up to her, winks, hands her his business card, and reveals that it was him. He was the green alien. His name is David.
David is an electronic data processing manager working in Fleet Street. On paper, he is perfectly respectable. But he represents a gateway to a world that Marjorie couldn't have even hallucinated in her windowless box.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They begin dating, and very quickly, David introduces this repressed, aristocratic, Prada-wearing widow to London's underground BDSM and transvestite club scene.
And we must explore the psychological inversion happening here.
Right.
Marjorie spent her entire life being commanded. She was ruled by her grandfather. She was treated as a corporate pawn by her husband's family. She was ignored by Douglas. She has never, in 30 years, held actual visceral power over another human being in a dynamic interpersonal setting.
She explicitly tells the listener, let a caged animal out and it will go mad with its freedom.
Wow.
When David takes her to these subterranean clubs, she doesn't recoil in horror. She leans in with a terrifying enthusiasm. She starts wearing bespoke tuxedos to these clubs. She engages in heavy domination. She describes the intoxicating thrill of having men lick her boots, of wielding physical power.
Yeah.
She writes that she felt like a male equivalent of the goddess Athena.
It is an intoxicating rush of empowerment. In the underground BDSM spaces, the social hierarchy of the outside world is radically inverted. The submissive, wealthy housewife transforms into the dominant, punishing force.
Exactly.
She admits in the text that this dynamic was wildly addictive. She was tapping into a dark, powerful reservoir of energy that had been suppressed by decades of polite society.
And this power dynamic rapidly bleeds into her domestic relationship with David. They get married after a whirlwind courtship, and their honeymoon suite in Paris becomes the crucible where the reality of their dynamic truly reveals itself.
Oh, the Paris scene.
Yeah, they are in this luxurious suite, drinking champagne, waiting to consummate the marriage, and David emerges from the bathroom wearing Marjorie's own wedding dress.
Along with a blonde wig and elaborate red lingerie.
Marjorie is initially shocked, but caught up in the thrill of her new, liberated persona, she goes along with it. This establishes a bizarre, rigidly role-reversed sexual dynamic.
Yeah, it does.
They only engage intimately on his terms, with David playing a highly submissive female role and Marjorie playing the aggressive, dominant male role. Looking back, she realizes this was a massive flashing red flag, but at the time, she was so blinded by the adrenaline of her own rebellion that she willfully ignored the implications.
Which brings us to the inevitable, devastating collision between this compartmentalized underground escape and the harsh light of daytime reality. What begins as a contained fetish for David cannot and does not remain contained.
No, it escalates rapidly. What starts as David discreetly wearing women's underwear beneath his Fleet Street business suits morphs into a full-time compulsion.
Right.
His desire to inhabit his female persona consumes him. He demands to be called Davina. He begins leaving the family home fully dressed as a woman, frequenting clubs and staying out until all hours of the morning, utterly indifferent to the chaos he is creating at home.
This escalation introduces Marjorie to a concept she terms tranny wives, a specific phenomenon she observed among the women haunting these underground clubs.
Right.
We need to elevate this beyond a simple definition and look at the broader psychological mechanism of collateral denial. These are women who live in a state of profound cognitive dissonance. They systematically sacrifice their own boundaries, their sanity, and their happiness to facilitate and protect their partner's secret lives. Systems of extreme secrecy inevitably force innocent bystanders to subsidize someone else's reality.
That's incredibly well put.
Marjorie realizes, with a sickening jolt, that she has become one of these women. She sees that David's pursuit of Davina is the only thing that holds any value to him.
And the facade finally shatters in the most public way possible. Paparazzi, likely tipped off, managed to capture photographs of David leaving their high society home fully dressed as Davina.
Yeah, worst case scenario for her class.
The photos are sold and plastered across the local papers. The elite society that Marjorie still technically belongs to reacts with ruthless efficiency. She is immediately stripped of her prestigious charity board positions. Invitations dry up. Letters go unanswered.
It's brutal.
She is ostracized, treated as a contagious pariah by the very people she used to host for dinner.
But the public humiliation, as agonizing as it is for someone of her class, is entirely secondary to the devastation occurring inside the walls of her own home.
Okay, I need to pause our narrative here for a moment and speak directly to you, the listener.
Yes, this is important.
We are looking at a deeply subjective, highly charged Roman Clef. In the text, the author expresses intense, vitriolic, and angry views on gender transition. This touches on very modern, very raw political fault lines, specifically regarding her ex-husband David and subsequently her autistic daughter Scarlett.
You're right.
Our role as your guides today is not to take a side, not to endorse, and not to condemn these viewpoints. Our job is strictly to report the emotional reality and the narrative contained within the source material. We are unpacking Marjorie's perspective exactly as she wrote it.
And Marjorie's perspective at this juncture is one of absolute, unadulterated betrayal and rage. The ultimate breaking point for the marriage doesn't come from the newspaper scandal. It comes from the collateral damage inflicted on the children.
Right. The twins, Lucas and Scarlett, are teenagers during this chaotic period, and they stumble upon David's hidden stash of extreme adult pornography.
Yes.
It acts as a bomb going off in the family dynamic. The kids develop a deep hatred for David. There is a horrific scene where David comes downstairs in a pink dress, demanding the children address him as Davina, and Lucas literally screams at him to F off.
Such a volatile environment.
The discovery of the pornography leads to violent, explosive arguments. Lucas, in a fit of absolute rage, actually gathers the explicit photos and throws them at the reporters who are camped outside their front gate.
And the environment becomes entirely untenable. Marjorie forcefully evicts David from the home and initiates a scorched earth divorce.
Yeah.
Thanks to an ironclad prenuptial agreement designed to protect the banking wealth, David leaves the marriage with virtually nothing. But removing David does not remove the trauma. The ripple effects on the children are profound, systemic, and long-lasting.
Lucas spirals completely out of control. The trauma manifests as deep aggression. He turns to heavy drug use. He gets involved in violent street altercations.
Right.
His descent is rapid, and he eventually spends 2 years in Maidstone Prison, which is a notoriously tough facility, convicted of dealing Class A drugs and carrying a concealed knife. He becomes completely alienated and estranged from Marjorie.
And Scarlett's trajectory is equally complex and painful. Scarlett, who had been diagnosed with autism as a young child, begins to deeply question her own gender identity amidst this domestic chaos.
Yeah.
She cuts off all her hair, demands the family refer to her as Rhett, and begins actively seeking medical transition to become male.
And Marjorie's reaction to Scarlett's announcement is visceral. She absolutely refuses to contribute a single penny of her vast wealth toward any physical transition.
Yeah, she digs her heels in completely.
Marjorie blames David entirely. She genuinely believes that David's perverted energy and the chaotic environment he created infected Scarlett's mind. A brutal Cold War descends on the house. Scarlett continues to live there, accepting her financial allowance, but they despise each other.
That's so sad.
Marjorie describes looking across the breakfast table and seeing a glaring, angry stranger she no longer recognizes. She realizes in these moments that this Romana Clef format isn't just a clever literary trick to hide identities. It is a necessary vessel for survival.
Right.
It is the only outlet that allows her to scream. It gives her a space to express a politically incorrect, vitriolic anger that polite society utterly forbids her from vocalizing.
And to understand Marjorie's intense anger, we have to look at the historical and legal landscape of the 1980s and 90s regarding gender and sexuality.
Okay, yeah.
This was an era of profound repression, where societal norms were enforced with legal and medical brutality. The pressure to conform was immense, and deviance was punished severely. Marjorie isn't just reacting to family drama. She's reacting to the realization that the systemic pressures of the era forced David to build a life on deception, and that deception turned her family into collateral damage.
Which sets the stage for the final heartbreaking reckoning. Decades of curated innocence, systemic family trauma, heavy secrets, and explosive reactions culminate in the late 1990s.
It is 1997. Ava, the eldest daughter, who has miraculously navigated this chaos and emerged relatively unscathed, working successfully as a makeup artist for film studios, comes to Marjorie with a heavy secret.
Yeah.
She admits that she has been secretly corresponding with David via email for years, and David is dying. He's contracted terminal HIV, his condition is deteriorating rapidly, and he is begging to see Marjorie one last time to attempt to make amends.
Marjorie is furious at the deception, but she eventually begrudgingly agrees to host a meeting in her drawing room. However, she enforces a strict condition. Her solicitor, Simon Willamot, the same man who helped smuggle Aletta out of South Africa, must be present in the room.
The visual description of David's arrival is haunting. He arrives under the cover of night. He is heavily reliant on morphine just to manage the physical pain. He is gaunt, walking with the aid of a stick, and dressed in a conservative man's dark suit.
Yeah.
The flamboyant green alien who spilled coffee, the bride in the Parisian honeymoon suite, those personas are entirely gone. He is a hollowed-out shell.
During this incredibly tense meeting, David shares a story. It's a story that triggered his own devastating realization of the damage his compulsion had caused. He tells Marjorie and Simon about a man named Martin, a local postman they used to know from the neighborhood who also secretly cross-dressed.
David explains the brutal mechanics of Martin's life. Martin decided he wanted to transition fully. Predictably, it destroyed his marriage, and during the ensuing custody battle, the legal system demonstrated the era's ruthlessness.
It really did.
The judge issued Martin a horrific ultimatum. He must completely cease wearing women's clothes, or he would be legally barred from ever seeing his two young daughters again. Faced with that impossible choice, Martin chose the clothes. He abandoned his children.
And David explains that years later, he ran into Martin's ex-wife in a cafe. She was a shell of a human being, deeply and permanently traumatized by the abandonment and the deception. And in seeing her, David finally comprehended the catastrophic collateral damage of his own actions.
Right.
He offers Marjorie a tragic, almost philosophical confession. He looks at her and says, "There is no cure for pleasure."
Wow.
He acknowledges with brutal clarity that his pursuit of his authentic self required the absolute destruction of the family he built to hide it. He tells Marjorie he's grieving for a person who never truly existed, and he knows fundamentally that he cannot be forgiven.
But Ava, acting as the ultimate mediator, proposes one final desperate act of intervention. She asks David to speak privately with Scarlett. She wants David to sit down with this confused, angry teenager and articulate the unvarnished, brutal reality of gender transition from the perspective of someone who has lived it in the shadows and suffered the ultimate consequences.
David agrees. We are not privy to the details of that conversation in the text, but Marjorie observes a profound shift. She notes that after David dies a few months later, Scarlett's entire demeanor changes.
Really?
Yeah, Scarlett alters her path, stepping back from the desire to medically transition, and slowly begins the arduous process of reconnecting with the family.
This raises an important question,
Mm.
and it is perhaps the heaviest question of the entire text. Can an apology, even a deathbed confession, coupled with a successful intervention, ever truly unring the bell? Does it undo decades of systemic family trauma?
I challenge the idea that he make amends at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah, did David actually balance the scales, or was this intervention just a final selfish attempt to clear his own conscience before he died, leaving Marjorie to sift through the ashes of a family he incinerated?
It is the central, unresolvable tension of the narrative.
Hmm.
Marjorie is left entirely alone to process this staggering history.
Yeah.
And the only reason we are reading this document today is due to a completely random chance encounter.
Yes. She is walking down a pavement outside a coffee shop in Hampstead. She trips and severely twists her ankle. A woman helps her up off the street.
Right.
This woman is an actress named Dillian. Dillian is blunt, working class, completely unimpressed by high society, and has absolutely no idea who Marjorie is or how much money she has. Marjorie invites her back to the house, and over a dinner of delivered Indian takeaway and a ridiculously expensive 1958 vintage wine, Marjorie breaks down and spills her entire life story.
Yeah, decades of secrets just pour out.
Exactly.
And Dillian X is the crucial catalyst. She listens to this unbelievable saga, and she is the one who convinces Marjorie to write the roman Clef.
Right.
Dillian frames Marjorie's story not as the tragedy of a foolish, naive woman, but as a vital narrative of courage and survival. She tells Marjorie she must write it down, change the names, and publish it. Not to hide, but to provide a map for other women who might be silently suffocating in similarly bizarre, destructive, deceptive marriages.
So what does this all mean? I have to ask you, the listener, to weigh in on this. Did Marjorie actually fail her children? Or was she simply a victim of an era defined by extreme, suffocating secrecy?
That's the question.
Was she a bad mother? Or just a woman who spent her formative years trapped in a windowless box and fundamentally didn't know how to handle the blinding light when the lid was finally violently ripped off?
It is a phenomenal, exhausting narrative arc. We travel from the silent, windowless box of 1950s banking wealth through the horrific systemic realities of South African apartheid, down into the chaotic, liberated, role-reversed underground clubs of 1980s London, and finally arrive at a fractured, scarred, but miraculously surviving family in the late 1990s.
It is an unbelievable journey. And honestly, analyzing a roman Clef like this makes you reflect deeply on your own life. How much of our own existence operates as a roman Clef?
Oh, definitely.
How many versions of our own truth do we carefully edit, subtly change the names, and sanitize before we present it for public consumption?
We all curate our innocence to some degree. We all build facades, whether to protect the innocent or to protect ourselves from the judgment of others.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think about the fragility of this history. If Marjorie hadn't tripped on that specific pavement, if she had never met Dillian outside that coffee shop, this incredible, explosive story would have died in silence.
It really would have.
It would have been quietly buried in the family crypt at Brompton Cemetery, lost forever. It really begs the question, how many of the perfectly manicured, quiet, wealthy families you walk past every single day are secretly surviving a narrative that is far too explosive for polite society?